Okay, hi everyone, it's Mike Hydrick. I wanted to give you a quick rundown of my do-it-yourself mist coolant setup on my CNC knee mill. This is the back of my enclosure, my electronics enclosure, where I've mounted a whole house filter canister that I'm using to hold my coolant, which in this case is WD-40. It really starts down here though at a regulator that I have plumbed off of my air line that I have coming in from my mill. I've set that at about, looks like it's about 30 psi. Really doesn't need to be that high. It can be as much as about 10. So we'll set it somewhere around 10 psi or so, 10 to 20. Anyways, that comes off of that regulator. I'm using 4mm OD hose that goes into these legless push to connect fittings. These are 1/8 inch MPT. This is an SMC pneumatic solenoid, 120 volt controlled. That solenoid is wired to a contactor, the top contactor in that shot, that's controlled by the all-in-one DC Centroid controller. That's my main controller in my machine. So that coming out of that port of that solenoid, I go in and I've got a little Y splitter, just another push to connect Y splitter here, and then I've got one air line going up into the canister that's filled with coolant, and then coming out of that line that comes out actually extends all the way down to the bottom of the inside of the canister, much like a spray bottle does. And then it comes out of that fitting, and then I have both of those lines going through this mesh hose that I got just at the hardware store, just as like a conduit to kind of protect it. And then that gets installed into this white HDPE block. What I've done is I've drilled that through with a 0.1 inch bit all the way through. That block is 3 inches long and it's 1 inch by 1.5 inches tall. But I've drilled that all the way through with a 0.1 inch and then drilled and tapped for the 1/8 inch MPT for the fitting. And then from the top, I've got a little valve, another push to connect Legris LEG RIS fitting. It's a little valve that goes down, and then I've drilled down into the center of that 0.1 inch through hole with a 0.08 bit. So just a real tiny passageway orifice for this mixing block, but you can see the block. Now, coming out of the block, you can see the 1/2 inch lock line. But the lock line is not used for pressurizing the liquid or anything like that. It's just used to be able to support and maneuver around that 4mm hose. I'm using the same hose. So inside of here, I have another 1/8 inch push to connect fitting that comes off of the other end of that 0.1 inch line, or 0.1 inch hole that I've drilled all the way through. And then I've drilled and tapped 1/2 inch MPT around that. So you have to go 1/2 inch MPT so that you can get a socket in and tighten that little 1/8 inch fitting. So it comes out of that through hole to the fitting, and then another 4mm line is on the inside of the lock line. And then right here I transition from 1/2 inch lock line to 1/4 inch. You could size the length of this for whatever your mill is. I got a pretty big mill, so I need quite a pretty long lock line. Here's the lock line nozzle, and you'll notice at the tip of the nozzle I've got a brass tip, and what that is a welding tip, 0.35mm I think it was, or whatever the size is for the Miller 35. And I've taken that little tip and turned it down on the lathe to insert it into the 4mm through line, make a real tight pressure fitting, and then it gets pressure fit into the inside of the lock line. So what that does is it makes for a really nice small orifice coming out of this hose that you can direct to your bit or your work or whatever. This design was created by some guys online, Brian Lamb being the main guy that put this together. I really thank him for coming up with this idea. So since I'm controlling this through my controller, we can now use the G-code M7 command to start the mist coolant. So you can see I've got M7, so press cycle start to start it. And so once I do that, now you can hear the air coming out of the nozzle. And I'll see if I can show you the mist just a real fine mist coming out of here. The idea being using mist. See if you can see the coolant on the napkin here. You can see it starting to get a little wet. Just a tiny amount of coolant is all you really need. Let's see if you can see it getting wet on the actual work. And because you're using that legless fitting here, you can control the amount of coolant just by tightening up this little nozzle. So the coolant comes in through the top, the air comes down through the bottom, it gets deposited, and the coolant gets atomized into the air, in the airstream that's running through there. So you can see, again on the napkin here, I turned it down so I can take just the finest amounts of coolant going through to your work. Just enough to keep it nice and cool and keep it lubricated and to blow the chips out of the way. And like I said, you could turn it up on your regulator. I mean, with this setup, you can go from, you know, just the slightest amount, or if you open up the actual valve, you can go to the point where it really starts depositing a lot. It takes a minute for it to start here. You can see it starting to come out there now. So you can tune it all the way down. You can put on pretty much as much as whatever you want and adjust it. But this is how you do a do-it-yourself mister. You're looking at about $20 in lock line, and I don't know, the fittings. It's probably $50 in fittings to run through there. You need about a $20 regulator, and it's about $20 for the coolant setup. So anyways, Mike Heydrich wanted to show you that, mister. Thanks again, everybody. Bye.